Well, let's dig into this now. Susan Smith is a former Liberal strategist, co-founder and principal at Blue Sky Strategy Group. Cole Hogan is a conservative digital strategist, principal at GT. George Soule, former director of communications for the federal NDP. Thank you three for coming in again.
Thanks for having us, Michael. Exciting week.
Yeah, I know. It's been a crazy week. Listen, I want to start here with what we heard from Pierre Poilievre regarding this cabinet choice, because he makes the argument, really, at the end of the day, this is a reshuffling of the chairs. These are still members of the Trudeau government, members of the Trudeau cabinet. Is that a problem for Mark Carney, Susan, if what he's trying to do is show a meaningful change from the last Prime Minister?
I think he's successfully shown a meaningful change. He is the new Prime Minister. He's also trying to show some competence and the right kind of continuity in terms of the relationships that have been built with the Trump administration. These are critical. Dominic LeBlanc, François-Philippe Champagne, David McGuinty, Mélanie Joly, Bill Blair at Defense. There's been a few changes of the chairs with Champagne and LeBlanc, but that's really important. But at the same time, he's brought in some new people and he's moved some people around. For example, taking Stephen Guilbeault out of Environment and Climate Change Canada. That's a very strong signal, I think, to people, particularly in Western Canada, about the kind of economic focus that Mr. Carney wants to have. He's put together a wartime cabinet. We're down to 23 members, including 24, including him. He's Prime Minister 24 cabinet ministers. And he's focused on the economy and security. And he even said in his first news conference that likely out of cabinet today, the carbon tax will be canceled. So that's the kind of signal he wants to send.
And we did hear that today, exactly. So Cole, what do you make of it? Because, you know, I hear what you're saying, Susan, but at the end of the day, Canadians know these names because they were part of the last government.
Yeah, and I think that's sort of the points here. Like, a lot of what the Conservatives are saying today is 87% of Carney's cabinet was in Trudeau's cabinet. So I think it's kind of difficult for Mark Carney to get up there and say this is a brand new government. It looks like Justin Trudeau's government and Liberal Party just asking for a fourth term in government that they sorely don't deserve. These are the same people that hiked the carbon tax, that doubled the debt, housing costs, the cost of living, and Canadians know that. So this isn't change, and the Liberals can't pretend otherwise.
George?
Yeah, I mean, I do think that he tried very hard to make just make change and say that he was changing. But I agree with some of what Cole was saying. Like, it is the same people, largely. I was surprised, and again, trying to make this big message of change, and then have Jerry Butts show up for the photo op today. One of the key architects of the Justin Trudeau era. You know, it's been kind of an open secret in Ottawa that he was helping run the Carney campaign, but for him to now choose today to kind of pop his head up, I thought was a strange tactic. So I understand the goal of trying to make the change, and I think in some ways they might get away with it with Canadians, but there's just a few key things. You know, at Mr. Guilbeault as well. I mean, moving him from out of environment, sure, that's a huge signal for the West. But keeping him in cabinet gives a hammer to the Conservatives to hit the Liberals with. So I don't quite understand it.
So we have to go back to cabinet making from a civics lesson perspective. You have to draw from the caucus. The Prime Minister Carney, is drawn from his caucus, just like if Pierre Poilievre gets elected, he'll draw from his caucus. I think he said, this is the cabinet for now, for the moment. We're going to go into an election. I think you'll see some new faces come forward, and I guarantee you that should Mr. Carney win the election, then we will have a newly composed cabinet. But look at the people that are there. Cody Blois, a young lawyer from Nova Scotia, long an advocate in the agriculture file, he's in. That's a new face. Ariel Kayabaga from London, Ontario, originally from Burundi. She's a new face. Ali Assassi, he's a trade lawyer by training. He's a new face. The other faces that you have at the cabinet table, not respectfully, aren't all household names, but super bright folks. Rachel Bendayan's a trade lawyer, bilingual from Montreal. She's in immigration. You've really got some very strong people in there, but the Prime Minister of the day, by the nature of the way this country goes, has to draw from his or her caucus to make up the cabinet, and I think we have a really solid bunch of people.
Okay, draw from caucus, but I'm also wondering about policy, and Cole, I'm going to bring you in here because, you know, we heard Prime Minister Carney essentially follow through what he said he's going to do. He's going to stop the consumer carbon tax. He also talks about putting more money in Canadians' wallets by spending less. He also talks about protecting jobs. You know, has he kneecapped the Conservative party by essentially taking the platform in some ways that they've been campaigning on for the last couple of years.
Well, we've seen Pierre Poilievre and the rest of the Conservatives team say if you want conservative policies, you're going to have to vote for the Conservative Party. And, we've seen Mark Carney parrot a lot of, conservative policies in order to try to shift gears from the more leftward turn of the Trudeau Liberals. But I think what's interesting in particular, too, looking at Guilbeault, is I think that he was moved from environment because Carney might have, a more, let's call it, radical environmental plan. I see there's been some interesting policies from Guilbeault. I'll give you a perfect example here. In his previous role, Mark Carney advocated for the financial sector divesting from all investments in the oil and gas sector. So we saw the Trudeau Liberals had their plan to get to net zero by 2035. They then capitulated and went to net zero by 2050. Mark Carney, in his previous work, advocated for global net zero by 2030. So if his plan for that was to get the financial sector to not invest in oil and gas projects, I want to know, as Prime Minister, does he still think that we should not be investing in oil and gas projects in Canada when we so sorely need them in this tariff war?
Although they're talking more about Energy East right now, and the Liberals are talking about as openly as anybody else.
Yeah, Mark Carney's been clear on the leadership campaign trail in his speech on Sunday that we all heard in Ottawa, saying he wants Canada to be an energy superpower in conventional and renewable energy. So I think that's very clear. Look, Carney is what used to be called a blue liberal. I am one of those. He's about fiscal responsibility. He's also about government playing a role where and when it's necessary, but not where and when it isn't necessary. It's about getting the economy back on the rails. It's about dealing with Trump. And this is what Pierre Poilievre is worried about. The ballot question for Canadians is going to be, who do you think is best to be able to deal with Donald Trump? Mr. Carney is an economist. He's worked in the real world, made real life decisions and policies, and and implicated them and costed budgets. Pierre Poilievre has been a politician for his whole life. He's upset. They're on their back heels at the moment, so they're going to try and throw whatever they can at Carney. But I think Carney sent a signal right away. His first message was, we're going to work to preserve the jobs of workers and rebuild the Canadian economy. We're going to build 1 million homes, and we're going to make Canada, it's about Canada strong.
Okay, I'm going to come back to you in a second. I'm going to bring you in, George, because I also want to talk about Jagmeet Singh here. We heard from Mr. Singh a couple times today. The first one actually had to do with a post that he put up for Prime Minister Trudeau as things were getting underway in Rideau Hall, because in this tweet, you see it right there, he essentially thanks and congratulates Prime Minister Trudeau for his time in office. He wishes him well. He wishes him more time with his kids, which, in terms of how partisan and toxic politics is these days, that was a nice moment from Mr. Singh. But then he goes on to criticize Mr. Carney's choices later in the day, because he makes the argument that Mark Carney, in the choices that he has made, abandons progressives, symbolized greatly by the fact that Karina Gould, arguably the most progressive of the candidates in the leadership run for the Liberals, was essentially shut out of the cabinet today. George, what do you make of that?
Well, I think, Mark Miller as well, who, frankly did a decent job working with First Nations across this country, and then was doing some good work with immigration as well. He was also left out, maybe because he was too close to Justin Trudeau. But again, when you have Jerry Butts and other people who were close back in, it's hard to understand. Also, Mr. Carney doesn't have a Minister of Labour. It's the first time in decades upon decades.
He's a Minister of Jobs, though.
Yes. Sure. I mean, it's great to change the name, but the word labor, as far as organized labor, working with the people who represent workers across this country, has been, Stephen Harper had one even. So that move away is significant. There's no minister responsible for women and gender equity, which again is a step away, especially from what we've seen over the last decade with Justin Trudeau. And I would say, I know Cole's saying that he's too environmental, but again, moving away from the carbon tax. Cody Bloy from out east, he was kind of benched from the Trudeau government because he supported the Conservative bill to take the carbon tax off of drying wheat and heating barns, which I actually happen to support that bill as well, personally. But for those people from the New Democrats and others on the left who believe more in strong environmental positions at all costs, That's a big step away from Mr. Carney too. So I think he is moving away from those positions, and I think it's something that should be called out because it's not who the Liberals are anymore. And even Susan says, and that's fine. It's fine that that shift's happened, but we need to mark it and be clear that if progressives really want a progressive government, Mark Carney might not be their answer anymore.
Oh, okay, Cole, what do you make of that in terms of does that create an opening or a vulnerability for Mark Carney that he's being questioned on his progressive credentials?
Sure, and I look in particular too, just as someone from Western Canada, I look at the fact that there's only 2 people in this cabinet west of Ontario. Mark Carney got that question in the presser today, and they asked him, where's the Western Canadian representation? And then he pointed to Chrystia Freeland and said, well, Chrystia is from Western Canada, I'm from Alberta as well. And it's like, well, okay, yes, both of you do have roots in Alberta, but I think both in politics and in policy, no one thinks they're a true representation of Western Canada or Alberta.
Okay, you're dying to get in. Go for Susan.
With respect to my friend Cole, who you often say you're from Saskatchewan, maybe you still have a Saskatchewan driver's license, but my guess is pretty high that you have an Ontario one. And so you never take the soul out of people from where they actually come from. So we have Minister Dogood from Manitoba. You have Jonathan Wilkinson from BC. Yes, that part is true. Carney is from Alberta. So is Chrystia Freeland. And arguably Carney was born in the north. This is the cabinet before the election. What I'm hearing from my friends is Mark Carney's too progressive, Mark Carney's not progressive enough. That's like a little bit too hot, a little bit too cold, maybe just right is where he's going to land for Canadians.
But is it a vulnerability, though? Because,
I don't think so.
in terms of a polarized politics, progressives may be looking for a place to go and may not be the Liberals under that type of criticism.
And where they're going to go, to Pierre Poilievre. This is a 2-horse race when it comes to the ballot question on Trump. This is not a race. This is a race where Jagmeet Singh is trying to get into the mix. He's a nice man and took the classy high road on the tweet to Justin Trudeau. That was very nice. He is a nice man, but he's not the guy that Canadians are considering in terms of putting them up against Trump. Trump's going on, and Poilievre's messaging aligns with Trump. 10% of his base is heavily Trumpers and would like to be the 51st state, and 9 out of 10 Canadians are fighting for Canada elbows up.
Time. You got 30 seconds to respond to that.
Well, just say that kind of, with respect to Susan, like that kind of arrogance is the old style Liberal arrogance of don't listen to the other parties, nobody else matters, it's just us and the Conservatives. And that red door, blue door, people have rejected in the past when it's been put to them that starkly, and I think that that's a shot for Jagmeet to get back in the debate.
Okay, George, Susan, Cole, we all like each other. Remember that. Thank you for this. We'll chat again.
Thank you.